Alibaba just launched a model claiming to beat almost every AI on Earth. Qwen 3.8 dropped this week from China, and Alibaba says it ranks second only to the most advanced AI system in the world right now. That claim comes from Alibaba's own testing, not an independent lab. China's other top model just launched weeks earlier. None of that tells you if the claim holds. By the end, you'll know if this is real or just marketing. Here's the actual sequence of events. On August 3rd, Alibaba officially released Qwen 3.8 Max, its biggest model to date. It's built on 2.4 trillion total connections using a sparse architecture, meaning only a small slice of that size actually activates for any single request. Roughly 95 billion connections switch on per task, about 4% of the full model. That's the design choice that keeps a model this large fast enough to actually run at scale, instead of just existing as a research showcase. It handles text, images, and video, and can process up to 1 million tokens in a single conversation. This didn't come out of nowhere. Alibaba previewed the same model 6 weeks earlier, on July 19th at the World AI Conference in Shanghai. That preview came with a specific claim attached. The Qwen team posted that the model was comparable to leading frontier systems and second only to Anthropic's Claude Fable 5. No benchmark table, no model card, no license, no price, just a size number and a comparison to the best model on the market, dropped 2 days after a Chinese rival had just released something even bigger. Previews like that have become a pattern this year. And it's worth naming why they work as a strategy even before anything is verifiable. A number this size attached to a comparison this bold guarantees headlines and social shares within hours, long before anyone outside the company can check a single claim. By the time skeptics start asking for the actual evidence, the story has already spread past the point where a correction gets the same reach as the original announcement did. That's not necessarily dishonest. It's just a media dynamic worth knowing about before you take any preview stage claim at face value, from any lab, in any country. That rival is Moonshot AI and its model, Qwen K3, landed at 2.8 trillion total parameters and went straight to open weight, meaning anyone could download and run it themselves. Qwen's answer, in a sense, was the July preview, a bigger claim, aimed higher, but with almost none of the receipts a serious evaluation would need. That gap between claim and proof is exactly the kind of thing worth sitting with before repeating either headline as fact. 6 weeks later, the receipts started showing up. The official August 3rd launch published real API pricing, a working console, and confirmed that roughly 95 billion of the model's 2.4 trillion connections activate per request. Alibaba says the model shows real improvements in reasoning, coding, agent tasks, and multimodal understanding, while actually costing less to run than its previous flagship. Investors reacted immediately. Alibaba's Hong Kong shares closed 7% higher the day of the launch, and its U.S. shares jumped over 4% in pre-market trading. That kind of same-day market reaction says something worth noting on its own. Investors weren't waiting for independent verification either. A 7% single-day jump on a stock this large reflects a bet that the claim will hold up. That bet was made hours after the announcement, long before any outside lab had a chance to check a single number. Markets and social feeds are running on the same incomplete information right now. That's exactly why the gap between a launch claim and an independently confirmed one matters as much for your portfolio as it does for which chatbot you open tomorrow. So, does the model actually deliver on the claim from 6 weeks earlier? Here's where it gets genuinely interesting instead of just being another launch headline. On the crowdsourced evaluation platform Arena AI, Qwen 3.8 Max became the highest-ranked Chinese model for text tasks almost immediately. That part is real and independently measured, not just a vendor claim. But on that same leaderboard, it still trails several of Anthropic's own models, Claude Fable 5 included. The honest version of the story sits between the two easy headlines. Qwen 3.8 is genuinely the best model to come out of China so far. It still isn't the best model in the world, no matter what the July preview implied. It's worth sitting with why that gap between best in China and best on Earth matters more than it sounds like it should. A model that's genuinely the strongest in its country still has to compete against every other lab's next release, not just the one it borrowed its comparison from in a single social post. Ranking first domestically is a real, meaningful milestone. It's also a different achievement than the one the July headline actually implied. Conflating the two is exactly how a strong result turns into an overstated one by the time it reaches a general audience. There's a detail buried in this timeline that almost nobody connected to the Qwen story, and it's worth pulling out on its own. Claude Fable 5, the exact model Alibaba is measuring itself against, wasn't even fully available to use during part of this same stretch. In mid-June, Anthropic suspended access to Fable 5 to comply with U.S. export control. Those controls were lifted at the end of the month. Anthropic restored access on July 1st, just 18 days before Alibaba stood on a stage in Shanghai and named that exact model as the bar to clear. Think about what that actually means. The model China is using as its own gold standard was, for roughly 2.5 weeks, not fully accessible even to some of the people it was originally built for. The AI race everyone talks about in terms of model size and benchmark scores is also, quietly, a race about who's even allowed to access which model, in which country, at any given moment. A parameter count tells you how big a model is. It tells you nothing about whether a government somewhere might restrict who gets to use it next month. That context changes how you should read every China closes the gap headline from here forward, including this one. The gap isn't just technical anymore. It's also regulatory. And that side of the race moves on a completely different clock than model training does. Play that forward for a second, because the implications go both directions. If access controls can suspend one side's frontier model overnight, they're just as capable of reshaping which Chinese models Western developers can legally build on, or which cloud regions get to serve them at all. Neither side of this race is purely a technology contest anymore. Both are running their model releases inside a regulatory environment that can move faster than the next training run, which is exactly the kind of variable a raw parameter count will never show you. Back to what you can actually verify today. Qwen 3.8 Max is live now through Alibaba Cloud's Model Studio, with open weights for the model promised within the week of launch, and a smaller companion checkpoint, Qwen 3.8 27B, gulling open weight alongside it. That smaller checkpoint matters more than it might sound like on first mention. A 2.4 trillion connection flagship makes headlines, but it's expensive and complicated to actually run outside a major cloud provider. A 27 billion checkpoint going open weight at the same time is the version an individual developer or a small company can realistically download and test on their own hardware. If you want to judge Qwen's real-world capability for yourself, rather than trusting anyone's launch claims, that smaller model is likely to be the more useful place to start once it lands. Once those weights actually land, independent testing sites like Artificial Analysis and Elamarina can run their own evaluation. That's the point where this story either gets confirmed or quietly walked back. Instead of resting on Alibaba's internal numbers alone, this isn't an isolated release either. The same week Qwen 3.8 went live, DeepSeek shipped an updated API for its own V4 model onto China's national supercomputing network. 3 major Chinese labs, Alibaba, Moonshot, and DeepSeek, all pushed meaningful releases inside the same handful of weeks. That pace is the real story underneath the size numbers. This isn't one company catching up to Anthropic and OpenAI. It's an entire ecosystem accelerating at once, which changes the shape of the race far more than any single model's score does. Compare that pace to how the US labs typically operate. And the contrast is part of what makes this moment feel different from previous China catches-up cycles. The single American frontier lab might ship 1 or 2 major model updates in a comparable stretch, each one arriving with a full evaluation suite and extended safety testing before public release. 3 separate Chinese labs matching or exceeding that release cadence simultaneously suggests something structural, not a single company having a lucky quarter. Whether that pace holds up alongside real safety testing or trades caution for speed is a separate question worth watching closely as more of these models actually reach outside hands. None of this is really about picking a side between two countries either, however the headlines want to frame it. Faster, cheaper frontier models reaching more people is a genuinely good outcome, regardless of which lab or which country ships them first. The part worth staying skeptical of isn't the competition itself. It's any single announcement from any lab anywhere that asks you to take its word for a claim nobody outside the building has checked yet. So, is Qwen 3.8 actually a threat to Anthropic and OpenAI? Or is this another size number dressed up as a breakthrough? The honest answer sits in between. The independently measured part, the Arena AI ranking, is real and it's genuinely the strongest showing from a Chinese lab yet. The unverified part, the direct comparison to Fable 5's full capability, is still resting on Alibaba's own word until outside testing catches up. Both of those things are true at the same time, and neither one cancels the other out. What actually matters here isn't whether one model beat another this week. What matters is the direction all of this is pointing. Every few weeks now, a new lab claims to be closing in on the frontier, and every few weeks, the actual gap turns out to be smaller than skeptics expect and larger than the launch headline claim. That pattern is the real trend worth watching. Not any single model's parameter count, and not the next press release promising to have finally caught up for good. If you're trying to actually use one of these tools rather than just read about them, wait for the open weights and the independent scores before trusting a launch day claim on its own. A model that's genuinely excellent will still look excellent once someone besides its own creator has tested it. One that isn't will quietly stop getting mentioned within a month, the way plenty of loud launches already have this year. That fading pattern is worth remembering the next time a launch thread promises a number this big. Scroll back through any AI newsfeed from 6 months ago and count how many biggest model yet announcements you can still name today without checking. Most of them didn't get disproven outright. They simply stopped mattering once the independent numbers came in closer to average than the launch post implied, and the next headline moved on to whatever claimed the record next. That quiet fade is a more common outcome than either a dramatic confirmation or a dramatic debunking, and it's worth expecting as the most likely ending here too. Next video we're checking back on this exact claim once the open weights actually land. We'll see whether independent testing confirms what Alibaba said, or whether the gap turns out to be bigger than the headline made it sound.